Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad. Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
Wow. Wow.
That's a new ad from Congressman Ron DeSantis in his bid to become Florida's Republican nominee for governor. President Trump will rally in Florida today for DeSantis, who he endorsed in a tweet last December, helping him move ahead in the polls of former frontrunner Adam Putnam, the state's agriculture commissioner. As you can see, the selling point for DeSantis is, I am behind Donald Trump every step of the way.
Wow. So I guess he likes the Putin stuff, likes changing U.S. foreign policy. He's a big fan of Iran, I guess. I guess he's a big fan of North Korea. I mean, you know, the party's changed so much. I mean, when I was a Republican, we liked balanced budgets. When we balanced a budget, actually, we liked paying down the debt. We liked keeping entitlements solvent. Let's see, what else? Oh, we were against tyrants in Iran and North Korea. That's changed. All of that has changed. It's so funny. I mean, you can't. I used to say that the party is not conservative anymore, but we are so far beyond that. They've adopted Vladimir Putin's foreign policy. Donald Trump has adopted Vladimir Putin's foreign policy. You have people on Russian television every night saying, the Soviets, we could never do this when we were the Soviet Union. Donald Trump is doing it for us. That's what Russian television commentators are saying. And then you look at our domestic policy, our foreign policy. Stalin wishes he had the ability to, impose tariffs and then pay farmers $12 billion that a lot of farmers are saying we don't even need. As Ron Johnson said, it is a Soviet-style type economy. When Donald Trump starts talking about picking winners and losers this way, I don't know if it's Soviet style. It is socialism, though, and that used to be, at least where I'm from, that used to be something that conservative voters were against. Maybe it's a selling point now. I don't know.
Okay, so let's talk about your former political party, which has changed drastically, I would submit, since you were last a registered member of the Republican Party. Right. And Jimmy pointed this out earlier. This poll, who would you trust for accurate information? Among Trump supporters, the result, Trump, 91%, friends and family, 63%, mainstream media, no surprise, 11%. So if you're running for governor of Florida, if you're Ron DeSantis, you clearly seek his favor. That's understandable. You want a favorable tweet from the President of the United States. It rockets him ahead in the primary. But among the base that we continually talk about, how deep and lasting is the fear, the clear fear, that many of elected Republicans have about the President of the United States?
I mean, I think the fear is there. What I don't understand is when leaders in my party did something I disagreed with, I went after them. And then I went home and I explained to my constituents why I went after them. They're spending too much money. Newt's talking about...
They're spending more now.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, though, back then, I could go home and I'd say, I voted against the bill because they're spending too much money. I voted against the bill because Newt's talking about getting rid of the tax cuts. I voted. I mean, you could explain it. And that's, Jim, that's what I don't understand is I'd hold 100 town hall meetings a year. You can explain to your constituents, and I can tell you at least my constituents way back then always understood and said, oh, okay, yeah, well, don't go along with the party then. If the party's doing it the wrong way, go your own way. And I always found it strengthened me, not only among independents, but among party members who trusted me more because they didn't blindly follow party dictates.
But fear is an exceptionally powerful motivator. Just step back for 1 second. You've got Georgia, basically a swing state, Florida, basically a swing state. The president of the United States weighs in on both of those races and takes Trump candidates who are way behind in the polls and instantly makes them such favorites that people are telling Putnam to get out of the race.
Oh, it's insane.
Now, instantly,
by the way,
overnight. That's power.
By the way, Adam Putnam, one of the most able leaders in the state of Florida, Republican or Democrat, Florida voters would be a fool to not vote for Adam Putnam.
But they don't agree with you now by a 12-point margin.
Well,
they think that the establishment is foolish to back Putnam. That is the power that he has. That's why I think it outlasts. The thing that Trump proved is that all the things that we thought the Republican Party stood for didn't necessarily what the base of the party stood for. It turns out they get more jazzed right now about immigration, about the changing face of America.
This is exactly. I remember driving over with my former chief of staff, driving over after Katrina hit. And we were dealing with, Richard, just extraordinary incompetence, not only on the federal level, but on the state level and on the local level. Now, my chief of staff said, you know what? This is what happens when we go down ideological checkboxes. And by the way, he's a very conservative Republican. He's an elected official. He said, we check off, are they pro-life? Are they pro-gun? Are they pro-this? Are they pro-that? And we get the candidates we want, and then a Katrina comes. And ideologically, they're lined up, but they don't know anything about leading. Here you have Ron DeSantis, who's dressing his baby in Make America Great, like outfits and reading bedtime stories, and yeah, it's cute and it's clever, and he's playing the Trump card. What's going to happen when the Category 5 storm goes across the I-4 corridor? Is Ron DeSantis going to be able to do that as well as Adam Putnam, who's been there for him? No. Nobody would begin to think that. It's just, it's lunacy. And I'm not just talking about this race, but this is how people ask, how do we get the Katrinas? How do we get this sort of the poor leadership we get? And it is this stupid dumbing down ideologically on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. Are they pro-choice? Are they anti-gun? Are they whatever on the Democratic side? And same thing on the Republican side. And nobody's looking for, are they a leader that can get my family evacuated when a Category 5 hurricane comes in Tampa Bay?
And just to say, we're going to have that problem. Indeed, we already have that problem for two reasons. One is, at the risk of sounding wonky, severe weather because of climate change is now the norm, is no longer the exception. Look what's happening around this country. And our infrastructure combined with that means we can't cope. So this is now, governing's hard, but we are making it a lot harder because we're not serious. We're not serious about climate change. We're not serious about infrastructure. This country faces a crisis economically, socially, in human terms, and we are simply letting it happen.
And by the way, we're not serious about electing serious leaders. Best leader I've ever seen, and he wasn't warm and fuzzy, Jeb Bush. Never seen anybody lead on a state level as effectively as Jeb Bush. Not a close second of all the people I've seen over the past 20, 25 years. And Jeb wasn't warm and cuddly. He just did his damn job. Anyway, still ahead, President Trump is awake. Good morning, Don. And tweeting this morning, he's taking a shot at the Koch.
Oh, my God.
He's taking a shot at the Koch brothers. Yeah, it's a smart move. You're so powerful. Hey, keep attacking the Koch brothers. Attack them every day. Go do it. You're so powerful and strong. By the way, I think you're also smart enough to sit down with Bob Mueller. Absolutely. You really should not listen to all those people that think because he went to Princeton and you went to Fordham that you're not smart enough to sit down with him. I think you are. I know we went to St. Paul's. I'm not sure where you went to high school in Queens, but you're smart enough to sit down with him. Sit down with him and keep attacking the Koch brothers. Anyway, he's attacking the Koch brothers after the network announced it wouldn't support some Republican candidates this November. Willie, it is a veritable war of words out there.
Yes, it is. And the Koch brothers are happy to have it.
Yeah, as am I. We'll be right back. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.